مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. بيل كلينتون كان قائدا سياسيا ناجحا تولى الرئاسة لفترتين قبل ربع قرن مدى، وأحد أهم إسهاماته في السياسة الأمريكية كانت الفكرة الأساسية التي قادته إلى الفوز بالانتخابات: إنه الاقتصاد يا غبي. وذلك يعني أنه في النهاية يهتم الناخبون الأمريكيون بوضع الاقتصاد الأمريكي بأكثر من اهتمامهم بأي شيء آخر، بداية من الأمن القومي مرورا بالهجرة ووصولا إلى موضوعات خاصة مثل حقوق حمل الأسلحة وامتلاكها أو الإجهاد. اليوم الاقتصاد موضوع مؤكد. بالنسبة لبعض الناس الاقتصاد في وضع ممتاز يتمثل في قوة سوق الأسهم. بالنسبة للكثيرين آخرين وخاصة الملايين الذين فقدوا وظائفهم خلال الجائحة، الاقتصاد في وضع مروع. الرئيس ترامب يعود بأن تنتهي الجائحة أما قريب وأن يعود الاقتصاد قويا للكل. يشير جو بايدن إلى التفاوت وعدم المساواة في اقتصادنا، وهو ما يقول إنه يجب أن يتم علاجه. من المحق؟ وهل الاقتصاد هو العامل الذي سيحدد اختيارنا للرئيس؟ لمناقشة دور الاقتصاد في انتخابات نوفمبر يسرني أن أرحب بالمراقبين السياسيين المتميزين جيمس أستل وديف ليفنثال. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. There's a famous phrase in American politics ascribed to Bill Clinton's political advisor, James Carville. It's the economy, stupid. It, in that one phrase, sums up the election campaign that brought Clinton twice to the White House. And it is a phrase that has stimulated elections and led candidates ever since. So to talk about the economy and politics in America today, I'm delighted to welcome James Astle and Dave Leventhal. Gentlemen, welcome. So Dave, in a capsule, how would you describe the state of the American economy today?
Well, the state of the economy today is quite rotten for many Americans. Millions upon millions of Americans. Are things better across the board than they were, say, 3 or 4 months ago? Yes, by many measures, but there are still just a colossal number of people who are unemployed. There are many businesses that are shut down or running at reduced capacity. And ultimately, the economic hurt, the economic pain that we're experiencing in the United States, as are many countries all across the world, is significant and severe and probably not going to get significantly better anytime soon.
So, James, President Trump is fond of saying that before the pandemic hit, America was enjoying its best economy in recent memory. Is that accurate?
In recent memory, yes, it was a very strong economy. Unemployment was down around 3%. Effectively, it had full employment. We'd even seen the strongest wage growth towards the back half of last year in relatively low earners. So the major vulnerability in the economy, the fact that the fruits of growth had not been widely shared, they'd by and large gone to the top half rather than the bottom half, had even started to look less of a worry in the back half of last year. It was a very strong economy.
So these are two different pictures in 2020 of a great economy until March and of a sour, almost not quite depression, but emerging, certainly deep recession economy since then. Now let's look at the politics of all this. Who gets the credit? Who gets the blame? Do presidents determine when things are good, and do presidents get responsibility when things go bad? James, how do you decipher this?
Well, historically, yes. When we look at the sort of fundamentals that dictate the course of presidential elections, incumbents get punished when the economy is rotten. And of course, James Carville's quote takes us back to an election where that was true. 92, the economy was weak. Bush was out, Clinton was in. Same thing to a degree in 2008, where although the Republican incumbent was out after 2 terms, his Republican would-be successor, John McCain, had an uphill task because the economy was so weak, and that certainly put wind into Barack Obama's sails. The same thing is not so true. It's true at the margins, but nothing like as true today. Put that into context with a very easy sort of bit of polling data. In October last year, when the economy was roaring, Joe Biden was 7 points ahead of Donald Trump in head-to-head polling. Now, with the economy very, very weak for large segments of the population, not for everybody, but it's a weak economy by and large, Joe Biden is 7 points ahead of Donald Trump in head-to-head polling. So the salience of the economy as a decisive issue has enormously diminished. There are kind of wrinkles in that analysis today because the economy is the only metric on which American voters are by and large generous to Donald Trump. It's the only metric where he has outdone his own poor approval ratings ever since his inauguration. And therefore, it's still a marginal advantage to Donald Trump. It is not the same determinative, decisive issue that it once was.
So, David, this is very interesting. So the economy that most people think is the key indicator of political success, is that not going to be the case this year?
Well, if 1992 was the economy stupid, and 2020 it's the pandemic stupid. And the economy is a significant part of that, make no mistake. Many people who are hurting right now, who don't have a job, who are underemployed, who have been furloughed, they're going to have that very much in mind, if not front and center, when they go to the ballot booth to vote, or many Americans will be mailing in their votes, as the case may be this time around. So look, there's a portion of the American electorate that no matter what Donald Trump does or doesn't do, they are going to vote for Donald Trump. And there's also a portion of the electorate that no matter what Joe Biden does or does not do, they're going to vote for Joe Biden. It's just simply that polarized. Really what this election is going to come down to, particularly in US states that are very close. We have a state-by-state voting system here, which is very complex and convoluted, a lot more complex and convoluted than many countries. Those voters are going to have to make a big decision for themselves as to whether they feel that the economy under Donald Trump is just so bad and that their confidence in it getting better quickly is so low that they have to go in a different direction. That's not everyone in the United States, not even most people in the United States, but those could be the voters who are really the determining factor in which way this election goes, either the way of Donald Trump or the way of Joe Biden.
So, James, you're a longtime watcher of the American economy. Step back for a moment. What role, what impact do presidents really have on our economy? Is there an economic cycle that has a life of its own, up and down, or do presidents, through their decisions of spending priorities and tax priorities, do they really make a substantive difference in the fate of our economy?
They make an important marginal difference, as I think you're implying in the question. They don't make a substantive difference. The cycle does not respond directly to what presidents do, by and large. Of course, Ronald Reagan made a more than marginal difference to the economy. You might argue that Donald Trump has made a more than marginal political difference to the politics of the economy because he inherited a very strong economy. He juiced that economy with tax cuts, and then he claimed all the credit every day, several times a day, for the strength of the economy. So before the pandemic hit, certainly, but even to a degree today, he takes credit for that economy in a way that his predecessors have struggled to do, they didn't try to do. So for sure, substantively, presidents don't determine the weakness or strength of the economy. This president has been singularly good at controlling the politics of the economy, and that's still playing out in this election.
Interesting. Now, Dave, when you look at the United States, Donald Trump has made major claims about lowering taxes, improving trade, raising wages. Can you give us a little sense of where we are compared to, say, some of the other countries in the world? How, for example, is our tax rate, relatively low compared to other countries, or relatively high compared to countries we like to see ourselves in league with?
Unbalanced taxes are in the United States quite low if you compare them to a number of countries, whether that be in Asia, whether that be in Europe, even countries in South America, elsewhere. The United States tax rate on balance is very low. Now, there are all different types of taxes. There's income tax, there's sales tax, there's corporate taxes. You could go on and on and on. And I think if you talk to people who are affected by some of the higher tax rates, they always want their taxes to be lower. Nobody likes paying taxes. At the same time, too, if tax rates get so low that the government can't bring in the necessary money that it needs in order to fund its operations, and here in the midst of the pandemic, government spending has been increasing considerably, you got to get the money from somewhere. And borrowing is something that we don't talk about a whole lot in the context of an election because it's not a instant, short-term type thing. But one major issue that the United States is going to be facing very long-term is the notion of a different type of credit, and not credit that Donald Trump is taking, but credit that the United States is using to get money and basically borrow its way to a situation that it wants to get in, of stability, of funding programs, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result of that, you're not going to hear a whole lot about that in the election, but man, if you think about your kids or your grandkids, those bills are going to eventually come due. And Republicans used to like to talk about the national debt and budget deficits. And that's just not being talked about a whole lot right now. Instead, we're talking a lot about trillion-dollar bailout packages for different segments of the economy and stimulus money that's going into the pockets of people in order to deal with the very acute situation of the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic fallout that's come as a result of it.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to try to break this down a bit even more, looking at how the economy is doing great for some, doing horribly for others, and what the political implications of that contrast are for our election in November. In just a moment. Could Joe Biden get millions more votes than Donald Trump but still lose the election? Absolutely. That's because of a quirk in our Constitution called the Electoral College. In this system, states cast ballots for president, not individual citizens. And those states' votes are based on the number of representatives they have in Congress. It doesn't matter if a candidate wins a state by 1 vote or 1,000,000 votes. That candidate gets that state's electoral votes. 5 times in American history, presidents lost the popular vote, but still won the Electoral College and hence the White House. 3 times in the 19th century, in 1824, 1876, and 1888. And then again twice in just the last 2 decades. George W. Bush over Al Gore, and in case you forgot, Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. Could it happen again? It's possible. But what's the most important thing every citizen should do? Vote. My guests again today include James Astill. James is the Washington bureau chief and Lexington columnist at The Economist. He has covered American politics for the past 5 years. Previously, James served as The Economist's South Asia bureau chief based in Delhi, the energy and environment editor, and the political editor. And to his great credit, James is the author of an award-winning book on India and cricket. Sitting with us today is also Dave Leventhal. Dave is senior Washington correspondent at Business Insider. Previously, he reported for Politico and several local newspapers around the country, including the Dallas Morning News. He has also served as editor-at-large for the Center for Public Integrity, a nonprofit investigative news organization here in Washington. So, James, if one part of the economy is doing very well, it's the stock market. Why is the stock market doing so wonderfully?
There's no absolute consensus answer to that, Rob, because it is such an extraordinary situation. It's an up and down world that we live in terms of the connection between the real economy and the stock market. However, it seems that investors are largely responding to the commitment of the federal bank to keep interest rates low, money very, very cheap, and stand by the economy as a sort of guarantor of last resort, just as we saw when the lockdown happened back in March, April. The bottom fell out of the economy, the bottom briefly fell out of the stock market, and then the Fed intervened and stocks have been climbing ever since then.
So, Dave, the implication is that we're a very big country. Some people are still doing quite well, especially those with a lot in the stock market, and then many Americans are doing horribly, as you pointed out earlier. When you add it all up, what are the political implications of this contrasting situation?
Well, indeed, there's definitely a situation of haves and have-nots in the regards of the stock market. By and large, people who have wealth, who have assets, who have money that they can invest, do invest in the stock market. They may do so in individual stocks. They may do so through retirement accounts. One is called 401k, which is very popular in the United States. But if you're a low-income American, if you are struggling to make ends meet, if you're struggling to just go by paycheck to pay your bills, to feed your family, the chances of you having money in the stock market are much lower than it would be if your financial situation personally was different and better. So as a result, while the stock market's increase may be great news for a lot of Americans who are by and large, again, wealthier, those people who are not making a lot of money, don't have a lot of income coming in, the political implications are very severe because their economic situation is likely going to be pretty darn bad and not getting better, but getting worse. And the stock market doesn't matter all that much to them. They're much more concerned about other financial considerations that Donald Trump oftentimes doesn't talk about nearly as much as he likes to talk about the rising stock market and the stock market being very high under his presidency.
So a few moments ago, James, Dave spoke about the enormous government spending over the last several months to address the pandemic, the stimulus money, the largest spending program in American history, $1,200 to most American individuals. Is there a lingering political benefit, do you see, to all this, or is that, as shall we say, money under the bridge?
I think certainly a segment of Middle America saw that as a crutch. We know that the poorest Americans have already suffered disproportionately. In fact, we've just, in the last 24 hours, had poverty numbers out which show that the poorest Americans, the always most marginalized American communities, have suffered disproportionately over the past 6 months. It's a sobering story. But yes, a portion of Middle America got relief from the government. Those that are already minded to be generous towards the president will certainly have taken that as another indicator of his munificence and genius. Those that were against the president before the pandemic struck are more likely to blame him. We are really talking about a very, very small margin of the electorate that is open to persuasion at this point, or was even open to persuasion before COVID-19 hit. When we talk about that margin, which certainly matters because it tends to be a bigger margin in the swing states, the half dozen or so swing states that will decide the course of this election, the game for the Democrats, for the president's opponents, are in connecting the state of the economy with his management of COVID-19.
James, Dave, thank you so much for helping explain the connections between economics and politics in the context of our election this year. Delighted to have you on Untitled Washington. There are so many issues on the political agenda: race and policing, healthcare and immigration, gun violence, gun rights, criminal justice reform, the violence and extremism of the hard right and the hard left, abortion, expanding civil rights based on gender and sexual orientation, the future of the Supreme Court. And then there's the world: climate change, human rights, war and peace, trade, the rise of great power competition with Russia and China. And of course, the wild card of 2020, the coronavirus. The list goes on. But if you put all those issues on one side of the ledger, there is one issue, just one, that traditionally equals and often outweighs them on the other side of the ledger: the health of the American economy. A leader on whose watch the economy is strong and vibrant, with low unemployment and inflation, with wages and the stock market climbing, that leader gets the credit, even if he is just lucky enough to enjoy the benefits of the inevitable ups and downs of the economic cycle. And a leader on whose watch the economy stumbles and falls, with rising unemployment and job losses, with declining wages or dips in the stock market, that leader gets the blame, even if he's unlucky enough to be in office when the economy suffers an inevitable downturn in the economic cycle. Presidents have a role to play in all this, of course, through taxation policy and spending priorities, but government certainly doesn't control everything. We're seeing a perfect example of that in our politics right now, as President Trump enjoyed strong economic growth until the COVID-19 pandemic hit and eviscerated the American economy. It never got quite as bad as it did during the Great Depression, when unemployment rose to 23%, but it got bad enough, with that jobless number rising from an historic low of 3.8% all the way up to 14.4% in just 3 months. In every city, town, and community in America, families suffered, losing not just jobs, but savings, homes, and sanity. That situation has eased a bit today, as unemployment has fallen to about 8.4%. Still more than double what it was before COVID, but a 40% drop from the darkest days of last spring. But that good news is tempered by the fact that we're entering flu season in America, with fears that we're about to face what some are calling a twin-demic, the confluence of traditional flu and a second cold weather wave of COVID-19. No one really knows how all of this may affect our fragile economy. We're therefore in uncharted political territory. Will voters give President Trump credit for the good economic news we had till March? Will they also hold him responsible for the bad news that followed? As much as any other issue on the political agenda, answers to those questions will determine the winner on November 3rd. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول دور الاقتصاد في انتخاباتنا الرئاسية، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.